Welcome, dear friends, to The Storytelling Dad. Here, we share stories about family, sacrifice, and the kind of love that often hides in the smallest gestures. If you find comfort or meaning in these stories, I invite you to subscribe and join our growing family of listeners. Today's story is titled, My Kids Said I Couldn't Afford Christmas Gifts, so I Built Them Something with My Own Hands. December carries a special weight. For some, it is a month of joy, of lights, and of laughter echoing across the streets. But for one father, December was a reminder of what he could not give. His children had come home one afternoon, their eyes downcast. They whispered words no parent ever wishes to hear, that their friends said they had no gifts to show because their father couldn't afford them. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. The father worked with his hands, day and night, yet the money barely stretched to cover food, rent, and warmth for the winter. Toys, shiny and new, were luxuries he simply could not reach. He said nothing to the children. Instead, he walked outside into the crisp night air, his breath fogging the cold, his heart heavier than the frost around him. In that silence, a seed of determination was planted. If he could not buy, then he would build. The next day, the whispers grew louder. His children didn't repeat them this time. He heard them himself. At the edge of the schoolyard, while waiting to pick them up, he overheard the teasing. Other children, bundled in new coats, with bags from the toy store dangling from their wrists, pointed and laughed. Your dad can't even buy you presents. Maybe Santa forgot your house this year. He saw his youngest lower her head, tugging nervously at the sleeve of her brother's jacket. The boy tried to defend her, but the words had already sunk deep. No child wants to feel small in front of their friends. The father clenched his hands in his pockets. He could not march onto that playground and demand respect. He could not shout down the cruel honesty of children who had never known the feeling of wanting. He stood still, silent, his heart aching at the sight of his own kids, shrinking into themselves. On the walk home, the air was heavy. The crunch of boots on snow was the only sound between them. The boy kicked at the ice on the sidewalk. The girl's eyes glistened though she said nothing. The father wished he had words to ease their shame, but nothing came. When they reached the small house, the children went inside without waiting. He lingered at the door, staring at the faded wreath, the same one he had hung for years, because buying a new one never felt important. In that moment, the difference between what other fathers could provide and what he could give seemed like a chasm too wide to cross. But in the stillness of the cold evening, something stirred in him. He couldn't fight the laughter of others with money, but maybe, just maybe, he could fight it with love. That night, long after his children had gone to bed, the father sat alone at the kitchen table. The single bulb above him hummed faintly, casting a yellow light over the unpaid bills, the cracked linoleum, the chipped mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He rested his head in his hands. The teasing words from the schoolyard echoed again in his ears, each one like a small hammer against his chest. He had carried heavy loads before war, hard labor, years of scraping by, but nothing weighed more than the disappointment in his children's eyes. He thought back to winters gone by. There had been times when he could afford something small, a wooden train set from the thrift shop, a second-hand doll he had repaired himself. He remembered the way his little girl once clutched that doll to her chest, whispering, "You're my hero, Dad." But children grow. Their needs grow too. A patched-up toy no longer sparkled in the way it once did. And now, in the season of lights and gifts, the truth sat in the room like an uninvited guest. He could not give them what the world said they deserved. Still, he looked toward their bedroom doors, closed now, the soft sound of their breathing carrying down the hall. He thought of how small their hands had once been, how he had carried them on his shoulders when the world seemed kinder. He wanted to protect them still, even from shame. He whispered into the silence, as if confessing to the walls, "If love is not enough, then let me prove it another way." And in that quiet vow, the first spark of idea began to take shape. The following evening, while the children did their homework in their rooms, The father slipped on his worn coat and stepped outside. The winter air bit at his skin, but he hardly noticed. His eyes scanned the alley behind their small house, the place where discarded scraps often ended up. There it was, a pile of wood, uneven planks, and broken pieces from a neighbor's renovation. To most, it was trash. To him, it was possibility. He gathered what he could carry, splinters catching in his hands, dust settling on his coat, and carried it into the shed behind the house. The shed was nothing more than 4 wooden walls and a roof patched with tin, but to him, it became a sanctuary. A place where the shame of not having enough could transform into hope. He set the planks on the workbench, ran his hands across their rough surfaces, and imagined what they might become. With every nail he straightened, every piece of wood he sanded, his resolve deepened. He didn't yet know what he was building, only that it had to be something his children would remember. Something that could stand even when shiny toys broke or disappeared. He lit an old lamp, its glow casting long shadows on the walls, and picked up a hand plane. The sound of wood shaving away filled the silence. It was not the roar of machines, not the hum of money being spent, but the soft rhythm of a father working with his hands. And in that rhythm, he found not despair, but purpose. As he worked, the smell of shaved pine and dust stirred memories that had been buried under years of exhaustion. He remembered a winter long ago, when his children were small enough to sit in his lap, their laughter spilling through the tiny rooms of the house like music. He had carved a simple toy back then, a small wooden train, no paint, no moving wheels, just the rough outline of something meant to carry dreams. His son had pushed it across the floor for hours, making the sound of whistles with his own voice. His daughter had clapped her hands in delight, proud of a gift no one else could ever own, because it had been made only for them. He could still hear her tiny voice from that night, when she had hugged him and whispered, "You're my hero, Dad." The words had lit a fire in him that no poverty, no hunger, no long shift at the factory could put out. But time had passed, and with it, the innocence of children. The doll he had repaired with scraps of fabric, the swing he had tied from rope in the backyard, those treasures had faded into the background of their growing lives. What mattered now, in the eyes of their peers, were boxes with glossy wrapping paper, brand names that carry status, and toys that flash with light and sound. He paused in his work, his hand resting on the smooth surface of the wood he had been shaping. His eyes closed, and he saw those little faces again, filled with wonder, when love alone had been enough. He missed that time, yet he realized perhaps it wasn't gone forever. Maybe, just maybe, he could remind them again. The nights grew longer, and so did his hours in the shed. While the neighborhood houses glowed with colored lights and laughter, his own was quiet. His children, tucked beneath thin blankets, dreamed of the morning that was still days away. Out back, beneath the tin roof that rattled with the wind, he worked. His hands were cracked and calloused, his breath visible in the frigid air, but he never stopped. The rasp of sandpaper, the rhythm of hammer and nail, the soft scrape of a blade against wood, these became his lullabies. Each stroke was guided by love, not money. He had no glossy catalogs to consult, no bright toy aisles to wander through. Instead, he followed the memory of his children's laughter, the way their faces lit up when they believed the world was magical. That was the blueprint he carried in his mind. Hours passed, and still he worked. Sometimes his fingers bled from splinters, sometimes the cold stiffened his joints until he could barely move. But he pressed on. With each curve carved, each joint fitted, the pile of broken planks was slowly becoming something else, something whole. He paused only once when the old lamp flickered, threatening to give out. He looked at the unfinished piece in front of him, rough yet full of promise, and whispered to himself, "They won't laugh this time. Not at them, not at me." And then, with renewed strength, he bent back over the wood, chiseling into the night. By the third night, his body began to protest. His back ached from bending over the workbench, his hands stiff from the cold. He had pushed through fatigue before, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just the labor, it was the question that gnawed at him. What if they hated it? He paused, staring at the half-shaped gift resting on the bench. In his eyes, it held promise, but would children see what he saw? Or would they only see scraps of wood stitched together by a poor man too stubborn to accept his limits? The sound of laughter floated in from outside, muffled by the shed's thin walls. Somewhere, neighbors were celebrating early music, warmth, the kind of Christmas he wished he could give. For a moment, doubt flooded his chest. Was he only fooling himself? He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake it off. Yet the words from the schoolyard echoed again, "Your dad can't even buy you presents." The shame cut deeper than any splinter. He sat down on the small stool, resting his hands on his knees. His breath hung in the air like smoke, fragile and fading. He whispered to the empty shed, "Will they laugh at me too?" But then, from the memory of long ago winters, he heard a softer echo his daughter's tiny voice. "You are my hero, Dad." That memory, fragile but glowing, pulled him back. He picked up the wood again, his grip steadier this time. The fear was still there, but so was love. And love, he decided, would not let him stop. By the end of the week, the shape began to emerge. What had once been a pile of forgotten planks now carried the form of something alive with meaning. His rough hands, blistered and scarred, traced the curves he had carved with care. It wasn't grand, not compared to the glittering toys on store shelves, but it was his. More importantly, it was theirs. He had chosen each piece of wood, sanded every edge smooth so no splinter would hurt small fingers. He had joined each part with patience, imagining his children's hands where his own now rested. As the lamp flickered above him, the father stepped back for the first time. Before him stood a wooden house, small, delicate, and crafted with precision. It wasn't just a toy. It was a story. Every nail held a piece of him. Every curve carried years of sacrifice. He picked it up, feeling its weight. It was heavier than it looked. Not from the wood itself, but from what it carried inside. His love, his hope, his quiet answer to the shame his children had borne. A smile tugged at his lips. Faint but certain. He knew the world might still call it scraps. But to his children, he prayed it would be something more, a reminder that even when empty pockets could not buy, full hearts could still create. He wrapped it gently in plain paper, his rough handwriting marking the tag. "For you, with love, Dad." And with that, he placed it under the faded tree, waiting for the morning that would tell him if love, once again, was enough. Christmas morning arrived with a soft hush, snow falling gently against the windows. The small living room glowed faintly with the twinkling of a string of old lights, some bulbs dim, others missing. Beneath the worn tree, there was only one package, plain paper, tied with a piece of twine. The children rushed in, their faces uncertain. They had seen other houses, other trees, overflowing with bright boxes. This one looked so small, so simple. The boy picked it up first, feeling its weight. His sister leaned close, her eyes wide, with both hope and doubt. Slowly, they tore away the paper. When the woodhouse appeared, silence filled the room. No one spoke. The boy ran his fingers across the smooth roof. The girl traced the carved windows with her small hand. They looked at each other, then back at their father. He held his breath, waiting for the laughter, the disappointment, the sting of shame to return. But instead, his daughter's lips curled into a smile. Then his son whispered, almost in awe, "You made this for us?" The father nodded, his voice too thick to speak. And in that moment, the silence broke not with ridicule, but with wonder. The girl clutched the wooden house to her chest as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "It's beautiful," she whispered. For the first time in many winters, the father saw their eyes shine not with envy for what others had, but with pride in what they themselves had been given. Later that morning, the children, still holding the wooden house as if it were a treasure, wanted to show it to their friends. They carried it outside, cradled carefully in their arms, stepping into the crisp snow. At first, The neighborhood children laughed. That's it? That's your Christmas gift? Just some wood? Their voices carried the same sting as before, sharp and cutting. But then one of them stepped closer. He tilted his head, ran his fingers along the carved roof, and frowned not with mockery, but with curiosity. Wait, did your dad make this? The boy nodded, shy but proud. The laughter faltered. Soon, the children were circling around, touching the smooth edges, peering through the tiny windows he had carved by hand. Their eyes, once mocking, now widened with wonder. It looks real, one whispered. I've never seen anything like it, said another. The father, standing quietly at the door, watched as the tide turned. The teasing voices grew silent, replaced by a different kind of awe, the kind that comes when something made with love speaks louder than anything money could buy. His daughter clutched the gift tighter, her cheeks flushed, not with shame this time, but with pride. For the first time, she met her father's gaze across the yard and smiled. A smile that told him everything he needed to know. What had begun as ridicule was slowly becoming respect. And in that moment, the gift of his hands had given them back something far greater, their dignity. Word began to spread in the simplest way. One of the neighborhood parents had seen the children gather around the wooden house that morning, marveling at its details. Curious, she snapped a photo on her phone. The picture showed the little girl clutching the handmade gift to her chest, her brother pointing proudly at the carved roof, and the quiet figure of their father watching from the porch. That evening, she posted it online with a simple caption. A father who built Christmas with his own hands. At first, just a few neighbors commented, "That's beautiful. What a memory they'll never forget." Then the post began to spread. Strangers shared it, moved by the sight of love carved from scraps. By the end of the week, the picture had reached hundreds, then thousands. The father, who had never owned much more than the clothes on his back and the roof over his head, now found his story being told across the community. People wrote, "This is the real Christmas spirit." Others said, "This man gave more with wood and his hands than money ever could." The children, once ashamed, now walked into school with their heads lifted. Teachers whispered, classmates stared, not with ridicule this time, but with admiration. The father didn't seek any of it. He hadn't carved for fame or applause. Yet somehow, the world had found him, and in his quiet act of love, they saw something they themselves had been missing. What began as a single photo on a neighbor's phone quickly grew into something far larger. Within days, the image of the wooden house, cradled in the little girl's arms, began appearing on feeds across the country. News outlets picked it up. Headlines read, "Father builds Christmas gift from scraps." Teachers whirled the true spirit of giving. Blogs and community pages wrote about it. Comment sections filled with thousands of voices. Strangers, parents, even grandparents, all saying the same thing, how deeply they were moved. "Anyone can spend money," one wrote, "but it takes love to build something with your own hands." "This story made me cry," said another. "This is the meaning of Christmas." The father didn't own a smartphone. He wasn't even aware of the flood of attention at first. To him, the shed was still just a shed, and the wooden gift was still just a gift for his children. But his kids noticed. Their classmates stopped teasing and instead asked if they could see the house again. Teachers mentioned the story in class, smiling with pride. For the children who once bowed their heads in shame, everything had changed. Now, when they walked into school, they carried themselves taller. Not because they had something expensive to show off, but because they had something no one else had, proof of their father's love, carved in wood and carried in their hearts. And for the father, even before he realized his story had gone viral, the greatest gift had already been given. He had restored his children's pride, and with it, their belief in him. One evening, after school had let out, and the buzz about the wooden Christmas house had spread through classrooms and hallways, the children came home quieter than usual. They didn't rush to their rooms or argue over who would take the first turn with a little gift. Instead, they stood by the doorway, staring at their father as he sat at the table with his worn hands resting in his lap. The boy spoke first. His voice was low, almost breaking. "Dad, everyone keeps talking about you, about what you made. They say it's the most beautiful gift they ever seen." The father looked up, surprised. His daughter stepped closer, clutching the wooden house as though it were still too fragile to let go. Tears welled in her eyes. "We didn't understand before. We thought it wasn't enough." But now she choked on the words, her small shoulders trembling. "We're sorry." The father's throat tightened. He tried to smile, but his lips shook. For so long he had carried the weight of their shame, believing he had failed them. To see their eyes now, filled not with disappointment but with love and regret, was almost too much to bear. The children moved to him at once, wrapping their arms around his shoulders. The wooden house was pressed between them, the symbol of everything they had once doubted and now finally understood. Through their tears, the boy whispered, "We didn't see it before. But this is the best gift we've ever had, because you gave us yourself." The father closed his eyes, his rough hands gently holding them close. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like less. He felt whole. That evening, the father set a simple meal on the table, nothing more than bread, stew, and a few apples saved for the holiday. It wasn't much, but tonight it felt different. The children sat across from him, their wooden house placed carefully in the center, as if it were a guest of honor. They didn't look at the food first, or at what might be missing. Instead, they looked at him. Their eyes, still red from tears, carried a warmth he hadn't seen in years. The daughter reached for his hand. "We don't need anything else, Dad. Not the toys, not the things other kids brag about. We just need you." The boy nodded, his voice steady now. "We were wrong to be embarrassed. You gave us more than anyone else ever could. You gave us love that lasts." The father swallowed hard, his chest tightening with both sorrow and relief. For so long, he had carried the fear that he had failed them. Now, sitting in the quiet glow of the kitchen lamp, he realized he had given them the only gift that mattered, himself. They ate slowly, laughing softly between bites, sharing small stories, rediscovering the comfort of being together. The house was still small, the cupboards still modest, but for the first time in many winters, the room felt full. And as the father looked at his children, smiling over the humble table, he knew the gift he had built was not just wood and nails. It had rebuilt something inside them all. Later that night, when the dishes were cleared and the room had grown quiet, the father leaned back in his chair. His children were still at the table, the little wooden house resting between them like a sacred relic. He let the silence linger before he spoke. His voice was soft, almost like he was speaking to the room as much as to them. "Money fades," he said. "Toys break. Clothes wear out. But love can last a lifetime if you hold on to it." The children listened, their faces lit by the warm glow of the lamp. He continued, his hands folded on the table, his eyes fixed on the wooden house. "This," he said, nodding toward the gift, "isn't just wood. It's proof. Proof that even when I had nothing in my pockets, I still had something to give. My hands, my time, my heart." The boy reached out, touching the house gently. "It's more than enough, Dad." The father smiled faintly, the weight of years softening for the first time. "One day, you'll understand that the most valuable things are the ones no one can buy. Love built with your own hands will always outlast what money can buy." His daughter leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering, "We understand now." And in that small kitchen, with nothing but the glow of a fading light and the laughter of two children who finally saw their father's worth, a legacy was sealed not of wealth, but of values. The days that followed were quiet in their little home, but something had changed forever. The wooden house sat proudly on the shelf, not just as a decoration, but as a living reminder of what love can create when money cannot. Neighbors still stopped by to see it. Letters even arrived from strangers who had read the story online. thanking the father for reminding them what Christmas was truly about. Yet for him, the greatest gift was simpler. It was in the way his children now looked at him, not with shame, but with pride. One evening, as he watched them laugh together, the father understood something deeper. This gift he had built was no longer just for his children. It had become a gift for the world, a story to be carried forward, a lesson about values that could not be wrapped in paper or tied with ribbon. He stood by the shelf, gently brushing his hand over the wooden roof. His lips curved into a quiet smile. "Love is the only inheritance worth leaving," he whispered to himself. And in that moment, he felt at peace.